Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of MI for Change. I am your host, Dr. Monica Gilbert, and today we're going to speak about how to use motivational interviewing techniques to work with neurodiversity, to work with clients that are of neurodiversities. So, particularly, we will focus on autism and also PDA profiles, and we'll throw in ADHD as well. So, let's start with just thinking about this theory of people that perhaps may process things a little differently than we do. So, and when I say we, I use it very loosely, but oftentimes when we work with neurodiversity, we have to keep in mind that perhaps the information that we are putting out there must be expressed, must be put out there in ways that won't overwhelm, but that will actually help. And we have to be sensitive to overstimulation. We have to be sensitive to these other sensory sort of situations that may happen and really focus on value based strategies. Sometimes we work with adolescents, teens, and even kids or adults who may not be motivated by social contingencies. So, a lot of us, we think about, well, if we do this in society, people will see it and we will look good in front of them. Or if we do this, then we're in this kind of place or whatever. And that becomes our motivator, but sometimes that's not really the person's motivator. So we have to be mindful of that and strive away from that. And it really comes from a sense of understanding, of acceptance, and also understanding. The other thing to keep in mind is the processing speed. Some of us have very quick processing speeds. Some of us have very slow processing speeds. Now, it's not that having a fast processing speed means that it's a good thing, or that having a slow processing speed means that it's a good or bad thing. We have to think about it in terms of how is it helping or how is it becoming a challenge for the individual himself. I could have a very quick processing speed, and it could be hindering me because now I'm impulsive. Whenever I think about something, I say it right away. I don't have that sensor where I first process what I'm going to say and then it comes out. It just kind of like comes out altogether. So in that sense, my processing speed is working against me. Or maybe I'm in a fast paced job and my processing speed is very slow and it's hard for me to keep up. So now I'm feeling frustrated. Now I'm feeling less than. So it really depends. Or maybe you're a therapist and your processing speed is slow. So it actually helps. It helps you reflect, it helps you pause. So again, we have to look at these abilities in terms of how it's helping or challenge or becoming a challenge for this individual himself. So motivation, processing speed, sensory, and also when it comes to abstract thinking versus literal thinking, a lot of individuals tend to see the world in a very literal sense. I remember working with a kiddo one time and I said something like, "Oh my gosh, it's raining cats and dogs." And he was like, "No." He looked outside and he was like, "Not dogs." I don't think he cared too much about the cats, which I kind of understand. I'm a dog person too. But anyways, so that is very literal thinking. We don't have that abstract thinking. So sometimes when we're working with individuals who are neurodivergent and we may be using a lot of this abstract speech and a lot of these metaphors, we're going to lose them. They're not going to keep up. And more so if we're using reflections in a very abstract way. The way that we should use reflection is in a very literal way and really pay attention to those sensory components. Give them that sense of like, oh, this person is really understanding that I get overwhelmed easily when I'm in a crowd full of people. And this person is seeing that I'm frustrated without me showing it with my face because maybe that's not the way that I show my feelings, but maybe I start just rocking back and forth. And that communicates that I'm frustrated. So it's important to keep those things in mind when you are working with a neurodiverse population. Now, when we're working with autism, for example, again, we go back to motivation is not directly connected to social approval. Sometimes it is, but other times it isn't. So we have to keep that in mind. Another thing to understand, as I mentioned, was abstract language that can actually disconnect you from that person. You're trying to build rapport, and it's just not going to work out if you're using a lot of these abstract phrases and abstract language. And it's always important to ask if you feel like the person is like you see that glaze where they're looking around, they're not really reciprocating. You can ask and say, "What would you like me to change, or how can I communicate differently so it works with the way that you understand it as well." So again, some adjustments to the way that we work with individuals with autism when we're providing direct therapy is using concrete reflections, things that they can actually see. Also, slowing our pace, allowing for more of that reflection, allowing for the time to process all the information, validate sensory and emotional experiences before goals. So, something that I may say is, it sounds like when things change suddenly, your body just shuts down, right? How beautiful is that? And how understanding is that as well? When we are working with ADHD, so with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it may be a little different. But what we want to focus on is that the motivation may have something to do with social constructs too, but really it's regulating and being consistent. That may be more of the issues there. So also for individuals with ADHD, it's this quick search for dopamine. We always want to look for something that's more exciting. We get bored very quickly. So sometimes that tends to happen in the session as well. And for practitioners, it's important for us to keep in mind that shame blocks change talk very quickly. So we want to stay away from shame, from instilling shame, from trying to pursue this guilt, and really it has to be a collaborative process. Some adjustments that we can do is again focusing on the values, not the follow through. So you mentioned that one of your goals is to get a new job. I'm not going to say something like, well, we've been trying to work on you getting a new job and you haven't done your resume, you haven't done this, all of these things are going to help you get that job. So instead of doing that, I want to approach it in a different way where I'm saying, the goal is for you to get a new job. If this didn't work for you, what are other things that you think you can do differently? And then also exploring, like, why do you want to get a new job? Why is that reinforcing for you? Maybe we want to stay in that conversation a little bit more so that we can accentuate those values and we can reinforce those ideas of why they wanted this new job. So that's what you want to do with ADHD. Highlight efforts, not outcomes. Again, with ADHD, executive functioning, hyperactivity, and attentiveness, we have all these things going on. So we want to make sure that we are also accentuating or highlighting those efforts where we're shaping in some way that behavior. And short reflections work better than long summaries. So short to the point reflections will keep their attentions instead of these long summaries. Something you can say is you really care about being dependable, even when your brain makes it harder. Now, for PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance, that is something that it's not really a diagnosis in the DSM, but it is something that has come up in the latest research and research articles. And also, a lot of people talk about this linked to ADHD and also linked to autism. So, with pathological demand avoidance, we have to keep in mind that direct goals or giving the person direct goals may seem like a threat. Here, if we focus too much on the compliance or on the I'm going to force you. And of course, as clinicians, we never think we're forcing the client, but our words may say otherwise. So we don't want to make it seem like we are forcing them, or we are in some way putting them in a cornered box, where they can't escape, because that to them spells threat. And what happens when something is threatening? You're going to fight, you're going to fly, you're going to try to get away from that, or you're just going to shut down, which tends to happen. The other thing is that sometimes praise can feel controlling. So using praise in a way that is not authentic, or even using too much praise, can seem very controlling. And again, this can be a way where they feel like you may be trying to manipulate them to do what you want them to do. Choices must feel real. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we're like, well, you have this choice. If you don't do this at work, you're going to get fired. If you do this, then you aren't. Well, that's not really a choice. It's kind of like it, it it's a forced choice that has both negative feelings, or has aversions for this person. So it doesn't really feel like much of a choice. So we have to be careful when we highlight those choices. When we do something like double-sided reflections, we want to make sure that is really coming from them. You want to use more open-ended questions rather than reflections when you're working with PDA profiles. So, when you are reflecting, what you should do, or some adjustments that you can make in your therapy sessions, is reflect autonomy, and make sure that you emphasize this loudly. We all know that in the spirit of motivational interviewing, we should all be accepting and really reflecting on that autonomy, but more so with the PDA profile. Because if control and direct, you know, goals and all of this feels like a threat, then the opposite is also true. Freedom feels liberating, and it feels like they can breathe again and then make these choices that will be better adjusted, and help them just become better adjusted at what they're doing. So reflect autonomy, and try to avoid the why. This is something that I remember going to through counseling. I think it was my master's degree, and our teacher was very hard on us using why. Like, don't use why, don't use why. And then I came into motivational interviewing, and it's all about using why, and it's okay to use why. So I think maybe avoid using why, but do it in a way that is natural. So don't suppress it where now you're saying something instead of why that doesn't make sense. I think it's okay to use why, just don't overuse it. Invite, don't direct. Make sure that you are inviting, that you are asking for permission before you communicate, using that EPE approach, or we are evoking, we are offering, right? The AOA approach, which now is um is the old EPE approach. Now it's called AOA, where we are asking, we're offering, and then we're asking again, and we're doing so with permission. That is the best way to really keep that communication going, which is what we want. So, an example is, you're the kind of person who needs to decide for yourself when something makes sense. So again, how empowering is that? And I think behind that sentence, we can hear loud and clear, hey, you have the autonomy. It's up to you. So again, less questions and more precision reflections when we are working with children who are verbal and are speaking with you. Um, when we are also working with teens and adults that may have a neurodivergent profile, you want to make sure that you are not just throwing a bunch of questions their way, and has to be more on the reflection, reflecting what they're saying. Make them short, but also make them precise. Don't go too artistic on those reflections. Less goal setting and more value alignment. I remember supervising a clinician that was working with an adult that was diagnosed with autism. And this adult wanted to live independently. He wanted to leave his mom's house and start a new job and start dating and start doing all these things. At the same time, this adult had a part time job and was making minimum wage, and he had a master's degree. So, but his challenge was that he didn't want to leave the comfort of this job to then have to go to this other job or start hunting for other jobs. And the clinician at that point was just frustrated. So I said, stop focusing so much on him, the homeworks, right? Because she was giving him homework to do on the weekend. He wasn't coming home. He wasn't coming to the session with the homework. And I said, stop focusing on that. Focus on the value. Both of the values have to align, the clinician's values and also the client's values. Like, what are we working towards? If we're working towards that independence and he's not doing that, ask him, what can he do? What are some things that he can do to get there? Let's just focus all of our sessions on that value. And this client actually started a full time job. He got fired from that job for different reasons, but then he landed on another job, which was his dream job. And right now, I think she's seeing him like every 2 months or something, just as a maintenance therapy. So it really works. And when we start aligning our values, we definitely see magic. We see magic happen. So less fixing and more permission. Let's get out of that fixing reflex mentality where we feel like we have to come in here and provide the solutions and fix, 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 fix. When in reality, it's not about fixing, first of all. But secondly, the client knows. They know what they have to do to get there. So let's just accentuate that and help them through that process. Ask yourself those 3 questions next time that you're in a session. And one shift that you can immediately start making, and you can make this right away, is replace the phrase or the question, what's your goal, with what feels important for you right now. That will shift your session completely when you ask that question instead of what is your goal. And one reflection that you can start practicing is you want change, just not at the cost of feeling controlled. That is an important reflection that you can start saying to your clients and really start thinking about during that process. And a mindset to hold during these sessions is that neurodivergent motivation is different, but is not deficient. We all have to remember that if you've met one neurodivergent person in the world, you've only met one neurodivergent person in the world. And I did go over some strategies on what to use or how to use motivational interviewing to communicate more effectively with certain diagnoses, but that doesn't mean that we're going to box them. We're going to always treat them as individuals, just like the way that we would want others to treat us. So I hope that you all found value in this episode of Am I for Change? And I hope to see you on our next episode. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Am I for Change? If you're ready to keep growing your motivational interviewing skills, I'd love to invite you to explore my MI Academy, where you'll find a full library of on-demand courses designed to help you put MI into practice with confidence. You can learn more at www.drmonicagilbert.com. Until next time.